poor. Why? Because they're poor? As a matter of fact, there's a definite correlation also between riches and abortion. The richer you are, the more pro-choice you are. And I think there's a hidden racism here, too. It's hidden. It's not popular anymore. But, we don't want too many of those people. Look, they're reproducing like flies. Hispanics, Muslims, blacks, we're the superior. We don't say that, but the feeling is there. Read Sam Harris's recent book, A Letter to a Christian Nation. It's incredibly snobbish. He says, there's two philosophies of life. There's the atheist philosophy of life, the secularist philosophy of life, which is enlightened and rational. And you see that in Scandinavia and Iceland and the Netherlands and Belgium and Germany and England. And then there's the rest of the world, which is religious and backward and poor and overpopulated. Which way will America go? I hope we go south rather than north. Because South's values, if I can use geographical terms here, are faith and hope and love and community and family. And North's values are money, sex, and power and science and technology. So, which are more important? No contest.
I was wondering, you had mentioned the principle of double effect earlier. Could you maybe explain the difference between a direct abortion and an indirect abortion? Because I think there was some confusion.
Yeah, direct abortion is always wrong because it's intended.
Even if the woman's life is in danger.
Yeah, because unless there's some act other than abortion that saves the woman's life, you're not doing two things. You're doing only one thing. You're only having an abortion. And you may not do an evil act even for a good end. There may be many people who are starving, and I could feed them all and save 10 lives by killing you and chopping you up and feeding your flesh to them. I may not do it, even though more good is done than harm, because I'm directly doing an evil thing. But in most cases, when it's a question of the woman's life or the baby's life, double effect works because you're doing something other than just the abortion to save the woman's life.
But it wouldn't be a direct abortion.
It wouldn't be a direct abortion. It would be an indirect abortion. That's analogous to dropping a bomb on a nuclear arsenal, even though you see that there's a hospital nearby and there's collateral damage and a lot of innocent people are going to be killed, but you know that enemy has his finger poised on the button.
Two other points. I don't like the dichotomy between pro-life and pro-choice. I mean, to be pro-life versus pro-abortion. I can explain why, but could you comment on that?
Well, it's rhetoric. Pro-choice doesn't really mean pro-choice. It means pro-abortion. Moses put the two together in two words, choose life. So you could say, I'm pro-choice too. And frankly, if it were possible to ram a law through Congress that reversed Roe v. Wade today without changing any minds, I wouldn't want that strategy to happen. That's the wrong way to do it. People have to want it. We're in a democracy. We have to appeal to people. We have to educate them. We have to change hearts, not just laws. So it has to be chosen.
So you would agree that we should make it pro-life, pro-abortion?
Not pro. Excuse me? We should change the words to pro-life versus pro-abortion? Yeah. Well, that's a little unfair, too, because in a sense, everybody's pro-life. Pro-choicers say, oh, yes, human life is wonderful. That's why we're for abortion. Abortion increases the quality of life. Nobody says life stinks. If they do, they probably commit suicide. Nobody says choice stinks. If they do, they're a tyrant. So those are two rhetorically effective words that don't clearly define the issue. It should be pro-abortion, anti-abortion.
I agree with, of course, the conclusion, but I'm wondering if the approach is as effective as and it may not be as effective because people have forgotten that our final end is heaven. But if we recognize that our final end, as humans, we direct ourselves, we are directed towards an end that is happiness. And if we focus on the fact that murder does more harm to the person who murdered than the person who has been murdered, I think it would have an entirely different spin, which may not be as effective, but I think it's more accurate.
I agree with you. But I don't think it's going to be very effective. I've noticed among my students, who are a pretty cross-section of decent people, that when we read a philosopher like Plato, who's very strong on that, in the Gorgias, for instance, a small minority of them are fascinated. They never came across that idea before, and this is a new dimension. Most of them just don't get it. What do you mean you're hurting yourself? How can you hurt yourself?
They've lost the idea of virtue.
That's right. That's right.
So you mentioned that we need to change people's hearts before we can just change laws. So do you think it would be a good or a bad thing to make abortion illegal? Because that's one thing that people talk about. They don't...
In itself, it's obviously a good thing.
Okay.
But I don't think timing it at a time when most people would oppose that change is a good strategy.
But, I mean, wouldn't you categorize that as this, like right now it's not, or would you?
That's another one of these penumbra judgment calls, because on the one hand, if you have a law forbidding all abortions at any time, now or 10 years from now, when 80% of the people favor it, when 50% of the people favor it, when 90% of the people favor it, when 2% of the people favor it, there's going to be some people that would be angry. So you can't please all of the people all the time. But at some point or other, it's obviously good to have that law because you're saving human lives. And saving human lives is terribly important. Well, isn't saving human lives more important than respecting human freedom? Well, yeah, life is more important than freedom. If I had to choose between murder and slavery, I'd choose slavery. Okay? Well, then why shouldn't you impose that law by force now if you can, just to save lives? Well, that's a judgment call. That's a pragmatic judgment call. I think the answer is because it would do more harm than good. In the end run, it would come back to haunt you. The sympathy factor would be gone. You'd be looked at as a tyrant.
Right, and I was also wondering about, people that say that, well, if you make abortion illegal, then people will still do it, but they'll do it, in unsafe ways, or how would you respond to that?
Well, it's true. The statistics are wildly overblown, but yes, there will be unsafe, dirty back alley abortions. Right. Just as there are now dirty, unsafe back alley assassinations. So should we make assassination clear and clean and safe? Anybody who wants to assassinate somebody else, let's bring him to this safe area, Red Square, where there's free speech and free assassination.
I guess the only, part of that argument might be that then you might be killing two people instead of one because, then if the mother dies in an unsafe way or something like that.
Well, I can use a reductio ad absurdum argument there. If that principle holds, then we ought to legalize all kinds of drugs because we can then ensure people that have free needles. And we should make prostitution available to everybody because we can make it medically safer. If we go from consensual to non-consensual, we could even justify anything. Rape. Let's have clean rapes instead of dirty rapes. And that's totally absurd.
I have a question about how there can be a point at which we can determine the timing on such an issue. When it would be a time that it would...
Ask a psychologist and a politician, not a philosopher.
Okay, yeah, but I was just going to raise the issue Brown versus Board of Education. There was enormous discontent over that Supreme Court decision in the South. But yeah, there's still, I would say the right thing to do at the time.
Good point. You've got to make a judgment call on where the conscience of the nation is. Now, the conscience of the nation right now is far more pro-life than the media would let on. And it's significantly more pro-life than it was 30 years ago. So the tide is turning. And that momentum is more important than the statistics. If you're a diver and you're in 20 feet of water, that's more serious than if you're in 10 feet of water. But I'd rather be in 20 feet of water going up than in 10 feet of water going down.
Wouldn't it be a legal change that would permit laws to be passed, but there wouldn't probably be a national law? It would be back to the state level?
It would be step by step, and the first step would be to reverse Roe v. Wade and let the states determine and allow states to prohibit abortion.
Timing is right, because there's not going to be a law passed the next day that says abortion's illegal.
No. But it's incremental. The law that Hadley Arks got passed, I think that was the one that forbade partial birth abortion, that took enormous effort. And that was so basic, something like 90% of Americans favored it. So there were formidable political obstacles to even a minor change. It was going to take a long time. Well, maybe not. Maybe not. The abolition of slavery took not very long. And maybe even if there hadn't been a civil war, Lincoln might have got his way. We don't know. We do what we can. We've got a lot of different weapons. It's not a question of shall we use this one or that one. Shall we use litigation, and should we use the ballot box, or should we use philosophy and education, or should we use personal testimony? All of it, for goodness sakes. Oh, they said one more question. See, unlike heaven, question and answer sessions are finite and come to an end.
Do you think there's a philosophical way to prove that life begins at conception? Like using Aristotle?
No, I don't think there's a philosophical way to prove that life begins at conception. I think there's a scientific way to prove that life begins at conception. The confusion between philosophy, science, and religion is endemic in most people's minds today. For instance, the intelligent design movement, I think, is good philosophy but bad science. And it's paraded as science, and I don't think it's going to work. So we have to make a distinction between what can be proved by the scientific method, what can be proved by good philosophical reasoning, and what depends on a religious faith premise. Yeah, there should be no contradiction. Truth is truth, whether it's discovered by philosophy, by science, or by religion. But the methods of discovering it and the methods of proving it is different. It is a scientific fact that the life of each human being begins when growth begins. As soon as you have the zygote, that single cell, it replicates enormously and very quickly and in a specifically human way. So to say that's potential human life is simply scientifically untrue. If it's potentially human, what is it actually? Is it an ape? Aristotle thought so. Aristotle was responsible for some bad biology. He thought ontogeny recapitulated phylogeny, so you went through the different stages. You were a fish for a while, and then you were an amphibian. He also thought that a woman was not quite a man because she lacked one organ. So if you put her back in the womb and let her cook totally, she'd come out perfect. So we mustn't go back to bad biology. On that note, I think we can end.